Well, hello again. This is Jose Palomino with the Revenue Throughput Podcast. And today's guest is a special friend, somebody I've worked with over the years, who has built a thriving business in the highly competitive web and software development world. His name is Jason Coleman. He is the CEO of Stranger Studios, and we're going to have a great time learning from him some key principles of how he took a small business, a practice, a professional service practice, and actually was able to leverage it into something much bigger, even on a national and global scale. Welcome, Jason Coleman. How are you?
I'm great, Jose. It's great to chat with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. So just on the intro, I mentioned that you're the CEO and founder, along with your lovely wife, Kim Coleman, the Stranger Studios and Paid Membership Pro. We'll talk about that a little bit. And but one of the reasons I was very excited to actually have you be part of this podcast is I really do see you as somebody who's a business builder. So not only are you a technologist, you actually took those ideas and built a business around them. So for our listeners, just to give us some context, let me just start with some kind of prefacing questions here, Jason. So first of all, like who do you typically serve? Like who would you see as your customers?
Yeah. So many of our customers were like, Jose, you yourself were one of our early customers of both like when we did web consulting and also like our membership product. And I think a lot of those customers are successful people who have a following in some sense, but they're looking for like new ways to monetize that following or, we have a membership product now. So that's a very popular kind of route to go when you want to start making money from people who are interested in your content and your stuff.
Now, when you say membership, would that also extend to membership organizations using your product and technology, or are these generally like thought leaders and specialists?
Yeah, it's like a wide range. About half our customers are associations. So
Okay.
the one I always share is like there's a Beekeepers Association of Texas.
Okay.
But there's a beekeepers association for every single state and every single country. So there's like, 1,000 beekeepers associations and they caught the word that like, hey, Paid Memberships Pro is a good way to run an association. So that's about half our customers. And then the other half are, solopreneurs who are putting out content or, it runs the gamut.
So what are the kind of, just looking at the business challenges that you address with your company, what would you say would be like the big pain or challenge that somebody's feeling that when they see you and what you offer, they go, oh, finally, somebody figured this thing out? Like, what's the pain?
Yeah. I think a lot of folks want to get paid. Like with respect to our product, like I said, they feel like a following, and sometimes they're told like there's this dream of recurring revenue while you sleep, or they're told like, hey, you have good stuff, you should have a membership. And so they're like, I guess I should start selling something for, $100 a month. And sometimes they're getting ahead of the game. It's like, they don't know what that something is. It's kind of like, well, build that something first and then we'll figure out how to sell it, but yeah.
Wow.
And India, yeah.
So they maybe they feel like they're not getting enough value from the market for what they are giving the market. Like they're giving advice, they're helping people, but they haven't found a way to really monetize that.
Yeah, like they're on Twitter and Facebook and they have a mailing list and they're getting attention, but none of that stuff is monetized. And they're kind of like, hey, how do I, make money for this stuff that I'm doing?
Well, the application, and one of the reasons I just love your story and what you do is, oftentimes you could have a business owner that's saying, well, I'm not really into being a thought leader, specialist guy. We make a widget, a physical widget. But then you start asking questions like, okay, well, you make the widget, but what are the services you attach to that widget? What are the other things you could do that maybe you're doing for free that actually people would pay you for? So it's asking that question, and in many ways, it's the same question you're helping people like process, but in this case through like knowledge products.
Yeah, yeah.
So Jason, tell me a little bit, and tell our listeners a little bit about like your journey, how you got to where you are now, and where you started from. And I was along with the ride with you for a while on that journey.
Yeah.
So I have some visibility to it. And I just think it's a great story about how you took some basic ideas and then turned them into something else. So could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, my partner Kim and I, and she's my wife, we've been in business together since like 2006 when we got out of school. I was in the, corporate world for a couple of years while she was still in school. And then she like, hey, I lined up some website gigs. I'm not going to get a quote unquote real job. I'm going to just do this. And then I slowly got pulled into that world and I was like, oh, this is, we like being our own boss and the flexibility of this. So we went from doing like general purpose, website construction, a lot of proof of concepts and Web 2.0 applications and stuff. And over time, we focused in the membership space and the WordPress space. And we found when we did services is that if you pick a niche, so to speak, and kind of stick to it, you have a more repeatable product. Instead of selling, like, I feel like some of the stuff we sold to you is like, it was a grand idea. Like no one's ever done this on the internet before. And we definitely were capable of like, all right, let's do this brand new thing no one's ever done before. But that's harder to sell than like if you go to someone else and say like, oh, I like what you made for Jose. Can you just do that same thing for me? And you're like, oh yeah, cool. I'll do exactly what I did for Jose and charge twice as much, that kind of thing. So we slowly narrowed in on the membership niche in the WordPress space, and built like a pretty good consulting practice, building membership sites for people on WordPress. And while we were in there, the products in that space weren't great. And so we were like, hey, we could do it better. We saw the success of other kind of WordPress products and said, hey, what if we open source this piece of functionality people need for websites and focus on that customer use case really well? It really led us to build Paid Memberships Pro as an open source membership platform. And we've been focused on that for the past, 10 years in total and really 5 years exclusively, like the past 5-6 years.
So the transition was from a broad range of services based on your skill set, like you could do things, right? So you started honing in that story to a smaller number of customers, a smaller number of type of customers. Maybe it was even more customers, but it was a smaller number of type of customers, certain particular type of problem. And then you found ways to productize what you were doing. And now in the last 5 years, it's basically all product as opposed to just like consulting services. So you can scale it. Wow. That's a great story. And I think a lot of our listeners are, even those that are in contract manufacturing or in professional services like engineering or accounting and so on, I think can learn from these examples of how you took a general purpose approach to the market and over time really honed that in. Wow.
Yeah.
And Jason, I know I'll just ask you, and I don't need the exact number, but I think it'd be interesting. So
sure.
How many individuals and companies and organizations are using your product today? If you had to gander a guess at what that might look like.
There's a little bit of a breakup, but were you asking how many people use our software? I
think
it's okay. It's hard to track. In our space, it's called active sites. So there's somewhere between 120, 140,000 active sites using our software, open source, and then somewhere around 5 to 10,000 of those.
Right, and I'm sorry, Jason, but
it's all over the world. So
all over the world. So you go from a local, regional, consulting business to the global, and so I'm not saying that you're Microsoft all of a sudden, but it's pretty impressive. You're in the hundreds of thousands of customers. That's fantastic, really great. Well, let me ask you this question, maybe taking your experience, and I think this is where we really like this podcast to focus on things that people can take away, right?
Yeah.
So if you looked at that journey you were on, okay.
Yeah.
What would you say was the one or two biggest challenges that you had to figure out a way, just stuff that you were hitting? You said, boy, I didn't think this would be this way, and now we got to figure something out.
Yeah. Let me think about that. I think we were making that transition from consulting to products, and one thing we had to do that was important, we were making really good money in consulting, and when we first launched this product, it took a couple of years to gain traction. We definitely kind of under your guidance, both directly and indirectly, because we were building your marketing websites, and I was kind of reading all your books and stuff, learning. But we had a really good plan, and we built a good product that was better than the competition. It's a classical story. It's hey, our product's better, and we tell everyone about it. And very like literally at like a conference, I talked to developers. We were kind of more developer focused at that time, and say, hey, this is better than the other stuff you're probably using. And they're like, yeah, it looks better. Great. And then like a year would go by and I come back to the same conference and I'd be like, oh, so did you get a chance to use our software? And they're like, no, I'm still using the old stuff because I'm used to it. And it took a couple of years, like for people to really like make that switch. Like people don't just change because they know it's better. You know, like people are stuck in their ways with software and it takes some time. So it really took us, you know, a few years to build up clout until like everyone is kind of, you know, like it's a slow roll of getting some developers and customers using your product, and then they talk to other people and they talk to other people. And then, you know, it's almost like they can't just like a developer could trust me that he thinks my product is better, but he really needs to hear from like 3 or 5 other people before he's like, oh, this is probably worth, you know, my time of making the switch. So yeah, it took a while to get that rolling, like actually get people using the product. And in that time, we were spending a lot of time, you know, supporting this. It was making a relatively small amount of money compared to, you know, the consulting business, but we were turning away consulting projects because we had to focus on the time on building this. And so at one point, Kim and I, we really had to make, it was sometime in 2015. It was like, we were making the jump. I think this kind of transition has that moment where it's like, we can't just do both these things at the same time. We really got to dive in to focus on it 100%. And we thought of it as an investment. So we saved the next 3 months, you know, instead of making $30,000 a month doing consulting, we're going to, you know, turn away all that work and we're going to only focus on this business and really try to make it work. So we really had that mindset of like, hey, we're making like $100,000 investment into our business and let's see how it goes. And luckily for us, like we had done the groundwork so that once we started like really putting the effort into like pushing the marketing and helping people and building new stuff, like we had already built the traction that, you know, turned it on. And we basically started asking people to pay in places they weren't because it was a free open source product. So we're like, hey, let's charge for this now. And people were like, okay, like there was no blink. It was like, you know, we had done the groundwork. So when we started putting price tags on things, people were like, yeah, of course, it's great. I'm going to pay for it. And so, it worked out.
There's a couple of takeaways there, Jason. I just want to highlight and see if I'm hearing this correctly. But, you know, one is shifting gears is not an overnight thing. It takes time. So don't get impatient. You guys played the long game and you planted seeds. The other thing you ran into is anybody who's like sold anything in the technology space ever will tell you is that despite the goodness or the inherent goodness of your offering, the inertia of people making change is a real thing you have to overcome. There has to be almost, some writers have said like a 3 times advantage to make a change. And no one's arguing when you show them the better thing. They say, oh, yeah, that's better, clearly better. I agree with you, it's better. But unless I feel it's 3 times better, it's not worth.
Exactly.
It's not worth it's not worth making the painful adjustments and changes and hassle. And no one's asking me to make the change, and what I got is good enough. And good enough is often the biggest obstacle in bringing a new product to bear. So you guys stuck at it and stuck with it, but you also built good. You built rapport. You built your network. You built people knowing you at a groundswell level. And then, so when you made the shift, and that's the third thing that I just want to highlight, you looked at it as an investment, and you looked at the possibility of lost income temporarily as being what you were putting into the business. So that was a bold move, and a lot of owners really, they know they should do it, but they hesitate to pull the trigger. So if you were talking to somebody who said, I think I have the better path forward, but I'm afraid, and I know mileage varies for everybody, right? But I'm just curious, what would you say to that person if somebody was telling you that what would you ask them to be sure of before they pulled the trigger and took that risk?
Yeah, I think what helps is to have customers and like start small. So, I said like it was kind of a problem where, even though the income at that time was relatively small from selling the product, we were selling a product. We put out a free open source product and people had support questions. And when that became overwhelming, we were like, oh, if you pay us $100, we'll answer your questions. We won't just answer them for free. And so now we have paying customers that we're talking to. And that was huge. So like I was actually talking to customers. So it wasn't just an idea in my head, like I think people will pay me for this. Like people were telling me like, hey, if you did this, I would pay you for it. That kind of thing. And so I think, definitely like having customers that you can paying customers that you can talk to is good. So your grand vision might be, hey, it's going to be, this big of a product that's going to have services and products. Like, and it's good to think about that, to know like 5 years from now, my business is going to have all these things firing and this is all it's going to be. But you don't have to wait for that. Like pick one piece of that that's, you know, really good. That's kind of like a minimum viable product, and like put it for sale for a simple price. Don't complicate the pricing. Don't complicate, you know, and just to start getting people paying you for something in that space and talking to them, because you'll have more confidence when you make the leap later. It'll be less clear. It's not just like someone's going to buy my product. It's like, oh, like Jose, who's already paying me $50, I'm going to try to get him to pay me $500 for this next thing, kind of a thing. It's a bit easier that way.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because, you know, one thing, so we've worked with clients who make, let's say, a big machine, an industrial product, and it has wear parts.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So those wear parts have to be replaced every so often.
Mm-hmm.
So you think, okay, so, and they count on that as like the parts business, but they also compete with other general purpose parts suppliers who could also supply those wear parts. Mm-hmm. They're like rubber gaskets and wheels and things like that, you know, certain things.
Yeah.
Point is, you start thinking about it. Well, I have customers buying those wear parts. I wonder if they would buy them on a subscription basis, for example. Yeah. You know, so you start thinking about other business models. You can test them. And the fact is, I don't need to change everything. I can just talk to my 10 best customers and say, would you pay for this on a subscription basis? Just have a conversation with them. And it seems like you guys had kind of a broader conversation, but basically you were doing that in little pieces incrementally. And you found that your audience was more than willing to pay you something for something of value. And that grew your business.
And it's like, I found that, and this probably goes across industry too, is like, sometimes people think you can only launch once. And if it doesn't work out, that like, that was my one shot. So you have to do it well. Like if you were trying to sell, you know, wear parts on a subscription, but that's usually not the case. Like people don't remember, like you try to launch your subscription wear parts service, it kind of failed. You realize like the pricing was wrong or the timing was wrong or something you had to tweak, like tweak it and then launch it again. You know what I mean? Like they, you know, like they, I think you can only get, if you're launching every single month to the same exact people, like I think they'll start to get the point. But in a lot of cases, it's kind of like, you know, you launched and if it didn't work out, like people kind of didn't notice by definition. And so like, don't focus on like these people who might be confused that like, hey, didn't you just launch last month? Like it hardly ever comes up. Like focus on all the customers that you're going after. So if you can test things and try it again, you know, anything that's kind of simple and repeatable, you know, throw it out there, try it. We kind of did that with a product and now we're going to launch again. Like we're trying to spin off a product of ours. And it was kind of humbling. It was like, hey, we have this big machine that sells, you know, hundreds of people download it every day and we're making money every day. And it's like, here's another thing that we're already selling to our existing customers. We're going to try to sell to this new space. And we launched and it was like crickets. And I was even like, I put it out there in like social media. I was like, hey, I'll set this up for you for free. Like I usually charge, you know, hundreds of dollars an hour doing consulting. I'm going to do it for free for you. And like still crickets. And I'm like, man, I used to like charge for my consulting and now I can't even give it away for free. There was a lot of people asking me to do other stuff. They were like, can you set up my shop? Can you do this thing? I was like, no, I meant like, I would help you install this product we're trying to sell. So that was like really humbling. Like we went to the wrong space, but now we're like back to the drawing board and we're like, oh, you know what? Like the business model that we have for our existing product doesn't really work for this one because it's a little bit different. And so it needs to be like a trial instead of like a freemium model, which is slightly different. And we have another chance to like launch it again. And we'll keep trying. And maybe we'll learn like, hey, you know what, like that market, you know, they're not actually willing to pay for this thing. It is good, but they're not willing to pay for it. They don't think they need it. And then like, we kind of kept it simple enough that it's like, okay, that was an experiment. It failed, on to the next thing. You know, we didn't kind of overly invest in it.
Well, it sounds like there's also like an emotional component to this, which is where you're willing to try something and you don't get blown away by the fact that you just, you know, the aim was off. Like you alluded to, it might've been the wrong people you were reaching out to. It might've been the wrong price point. Might've been the wrong product feature that you were excited about, but they weren't. Right. And any one of those things could be the case. And it seems like, you know, you take those as learning experiences and go back to the drawing board and try something else. And I also think what you just said before about people having short memories, I think is absolutely true. We sometimes think, you know, I've talked to people who haven't done like email campaigns of any kind. They say, well, I don't want to bother people because they'll think we're spamming them. I said, they won't even remember you sent them an email last week. It's only, they might notice an email if it's a well written or well titled email today, but they won't know that you just sent them 17 other emails over the last 18 weeks. They don't know, don't care. It's that. Mm-hmm. If they feel it's too much, they'll unsubscribe. Don't take it personally. I mean, that's, it's those kinds of things.
Yeah, they weren't going to be a customer anyway. Like that person who unsubscribes, like probably wasn't going to pay you. I mean,
probably wasn't going to pay. That's a really good thought there. So, wow. So, Jason, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time. And if somebody wanted to know more about your work and what you do, where should they go online to learn more about you?
Yeah, they can go to strangerstudios.com, and that's where we round up kind of all the stuff we're involved in. And then I'm most active socially on Twitter. It's Jason_Coleman. And that's where I'm chatting.
Great. So we'll put that in our show notes as well, your domain and your Twitter address. And but Jason, again, thank you so much for being part of this. I think there's some great insights we got out of just the entrepreneurial journey. So I really appreciate it, and have a great rest of the week.
Yeah, thanks, Jose. It's been awesome. Okay.